Hello, my name is Jonay Neris Tomé. I'm a researcher of the University of La Laguna, focused on soil science and hydrology. The topic I'm going to present is disaster risk reduction in relation to geological hazards, erosion, and environmental restoration. This presentation will have the next contents. We will start with a general background on natural hazards. We will define what is disaster risk reduction, or DRR. We will talk about why disaster risk reduction is so important nowadays. We define what is mainstreaming disaster risk reduction. We will talk about the different steps of planning disaster risk reduction. And we will conclude with some additional references. Well, the rapid economic and social development in recent decades has led some new form of vulnerability to natural hazards and increased existing ones. Today, we can say that more than half of the world's population live in urban centers. Informal settlements, social inequality, environmental degradation, and climate change are common processes, and there is a general lack of proper planning. As a result, human and economic losses related to natural disaster have increased considerably in recent decades. Besides, the effect of natural disasters show a high degree of dependence on prior development policies. And as a result, it is necessary to include disaster risk reduction approach in development planning in order to prevent disaster risks. But what is disaster risk reduction? Well, according to the United Nations International Strategy for Disaster Reduction, DRR is the concept and practice of reducing disaster risk through systematic efforts aimed at the analysis and management of the causal factors of disaster, including the reduction of the level of exposure to threats, the reduction of vulnerability of people and property, the waste management of soil and environment, and the improvement of preparedness for adverse events. How can we achieve these objectives? Well, we should incorporate DRR into the plans and programs, include DRR strategies to reduce poverty, increase resistance to disaster of basic infrastructure, and manage urban growth and planning. Why is disaster risk reduction so important nowadays? According to the United Nations, it is estimated that between 1980 and 2000, about 75% of the world population was affected by a natural disaster at least once. Besides, the losses resulting have increased tenfold in the last 50 years, mainly in developing areas where their inhabitants are more exposed to them. This is due to the population growth, the lack of planning, the climate change, and the increase in extreme events, and poverty and inequality. The effect of natural disaster could be divided into effect on population and economic losses. Since the early 20th century, the number of deaths has increased considerably. However, the number of affected people has increased substantially. Human losses are concentrated nowadays in underdeveloped areas, and the main natural disasters are earthquakes, tropical cyclones, and floods. Economic losses include direct cost related to damage to productive stock and infrastructure, indirect cost, disorders on supply of goods and services, and side effects, which are short and long-term socioeconomic conditions. The dramatic and costly consequences of natural disaster have led to an increase in the recognition of the need to mainstream the disaster risk reduction into development since the late 90s. But what that means? What means mainstream DRR? What it means to address natural risks in strategies, policies, and projects. Mainstream DRR consists of ensuring that disaster risk reduction is a national and local priority, identify, assess, and monitor disaster risk and enhance early warning, use knowledge, innovation, and education to build a culture of safety and resilience, reduce the underlying risk factors, and strengthen preparedness for effective response. One of the main objectives of mainstream DRR is to develop DRR plans. They are divided in 3 steps. The first step of planning disaster risk reduction is identify and characterize risk source. 2, recognize and understand natural hazards in the area, identify knowledge gaps, identify present and future risks from natural hazards, and make decisions about how to deal with those risks. In this step, crucial information is related to location and extent of the hazard, the frequency and probability, intensity or severity, and duration. The second step is to acquire and use information. Here, the key factors are the access to information. Any restriction of useful information is important. Data quality, related to inaccurate, incomplete, incompatible, or outdated information. Capacity to collect and use data, develop practical collection and analytical system is necessary. And the uncertainty related to modeling processes, result, interpretation, and decision making. The last step is develop strategies divided in 4 different phases. The prevention and mitigation phase, which is the avoidance or limitation of the impacts. The preparedness step, or anticipate the impacts. The response phase, which is immediate provision of emergency service. And the recovery phase, which is restoration of facilities and livelihood. Here you have some additional reference of interest, most of them related to the United Nations. And if you want more information, you can access to our webpage or send me a mail to my email address. Thank you very much for your attention.